Well, this is my first English video in English in ages. It's gonna be about Michael Jackson. Why am I talking about a man who's died almost 10 years ago? I like some of his music, but I'm not a fan. I realize a necessity of the media to destroy his legacy, which is kind of strange. They come up with a documentary when you say this documentary is filled with holes, these people are not credible, then they say you're not listening to the victims and you're defending pedophiles. I hate pedophiles more than anything in my life. I really disgust them. They make me want to puke. And pedophiles I abhor them. Sometimes I come up online with people saying, speaking of virtuous pedophiles, between commas, people who don't abuse. Okay, they may not abuse, but they got tons of child porn in their computers. You can be sure of that. I abhor all these things, and I've seen anarcho-capitalists and people who claim to be liberals defending these creatures. I've seen a TEDx talk, and then I see this about Michael Jackson, and I say, well, this documentary has holes in it. These guys show no emotion when they talk about the abuse, and the abuse they talk about, it goes way beyond alleged abuse that's been described in 1993. I'm old enough to remember the 1993 case. I remember it, and the thing was about touching. And then the kid changed the stories. Oh no, he taught me to masturbate. And then he showed a drawing of a circumcised penis. And Michael Jackson had no circumcised penis. And there is the link to his autopsy in the description. So it is very weird. So I come up now with the stories, which are very weird. You can see a guy such as Michael Jackson doing those things because he was very delicate. He was kind of a frail dude. And the things that are described there are very explicit and violent. Anal sex, this kind of stuff that can be really hurtful. I watched it. I watched Leaving Neverland. For me, it was just another documentary on musicians like Soaked and Bleach. After watching it, you think, well, Courtney might have paid somebody to kill Kurt. And then there is this other documentary of some French guys in which El Duce appears. El Duce of the Mentors, that incredible band. El Duce is as drunk as fuck. And he says that Courtney has offered him $50,000 to have Kurt killed. Trust El Duce. That's El Duce. See the name the guy uses? El Duce. There's Mussolini's name. And the Mentors, they were disgusting. How can you believe that guy? Soaked and Bleach and this whole other documentary on Kurt are totally nonsensical, and we have to come to terms that Kurt committed suicide. And no documentary will change that. And then comes this Leaving Neverland thing. Two guys speaking of alleged abuse, and then you gotta believe in it. If you don't believe in it, you're a pedo supporter. Man, I like to kill pedophiles. I have to control myself when I hear of abuse because my blood starts to boil. I'm a lawyer, I'm a family law attorney. I've heard so many cases of abuse. I've seen it, and the people I've seen it were like this woman who, years after her abuse as a child, she was in a class studying something, and the wife of the guy who had abused her sat near her, and she left the classroom and went back home, and she felt bad the whole day. They don't feel comfortable talking about it. They don't use lawyer talk. Of course, every person is a person, but another person I met who's been abused, she's been abused by her stepfather. She fled the country after for some time. She really left the country and lived in another place. Psychologically, I think she just needed to be as far away from that individual as she could. So, well, Michael Jackson was a weird dude. He was a very weird guy. He got too rich, possibly megalomania, this kinds of thing. It started affecting him He possibly had obsessive compulsive disorder. He had been abused by his father. The way he was always changing, but I noticed the necessity to destroy him even after his death with a bogus pseudo-documentary filled with holes, in which a guy says he was raped in a place that didn't exist. And they romanticize the most horrible things. You don't romanticize the thing when you're talking. And you don't leave with a memory thinking it's a good thing, and then you go through therapy and suddenly realize that it wasn't a good thing, that it was a bad thing. You don't change. There is a difference between repressed memories and reinterpreting your memories. Forgive my English, it's not my first language. But I recently also watched Faces of Death. Faces of Death, inexplicably, is full here on YouTube. Don't ask me why, but it's here. When I was a kid in the 90s, there was we had to study philosophy and sociology. This is water, okay? And we had to discuss death. And a kid brought into class Faces of Death, and we watched the execution scene, in a scene in which there is a ritual where they kill a guy and then they eat him. Well, the scene of the execution really impressed me for years. But the scene of the cult execution, killing the guy, I really thought it was weird and didn't believe in it very much. Then I rewatched it and I saw some things that were strange, but they still scared me. More recently, on this weekend, after watching Leaving Neverland, I've watched Faces of Death again, here on YouTube. And there is a scene which shocked me, which is a dog fight. I love dogs. I've had dogs. One thing that I don't like about Michael Jackson is that he didn't like dogs. There's this dog fight scene, and I was terrified. I thought it was real. But then I read one of the producers saying that it wasn't real. They had these two dogs that were very soft and stuff, and they covered them in jelly. And then they started playing around like dogs do. And the producer said it was one of those most meaningless scenes. It was kind of cute. But then we added music and someone narrating with a creepy voice. A guy who's gross. How did I notice that it was so fake? Look at the name of the narrator. He's telling all the story. It was a professional actor. And the dogs weren't fighting. They just got a meaningless scene. They added a creepy music and someone speaking on it and telling a creepy story. So you believed in it and you were terrified. That's how our brain works. And that's the same thing with the execution scenes. They got this guy, the name was Tony da Silva, of the character. And they tie him to a chair and they put some bandages on his eyes, and it starts drilling and what seems to be blood starts pouring from his eyes. Well, it's fake. It's fake. There were tubes attached to these bandages from behind, and somebody was pulling syringes filled with ketchup, and but everybody believed in it because the acting and the narrator explaining everything in the creepy way. And then there was the monkey scene. They start by bringing up a monkey, a real monkey, and they put him, and they say it was in a restaurant in Egypt, but nobody looks Egyptian there, and they tied this monkey to the chair per monkey. But then the monkey that was kind of pink, the face of the monkey was pink, then it becomes gray, so it doesn't look like the same monkey. They start biting on it, and they crack down the skull and get things they see are brains in it, and they start eating. It was cauliflower, and they say it was monkey brain, and no monkey was harmed, and we believed in it. And on the cover it's written that it's been banned in 48 countries, and we believed in it. Even in the 90s people were believing in it. I watched it like in 94. We were kids in high school, and we were terrified. You had to see a reaction school watching it. We were like, ah! When I found out those scenes weren't real, that everything had been staged, and that they really had gotten some real death scenes from stock footage or news from the news, and then they added more scenes in it, like the scene in which they recover a body of a drowned man at the beach. It's real. But there is the suicide scene that just after a woman jumps, you see a body. It cuts and shows a body and a pool of blood under the body, and the director disguised because it doesn't show his face. He says that it was an actress they had put in there. The scene of the suicide was real. It had appeared in some news, I don't know where, and they got it. And then they edited and put that woman lying on the blood, just to be more credible for them. And then they put some meat house, slaughterhouse things, to be more gory and stuff. And you had to see as kids in the 90s because we were in Brazil. We didn't have internet back then in the early 90s, up to 95. There was no internet. And even in the late 90s, not everybody would have internet here. And we would talk about Faces of Death. Wow, on Faces of Death, so there is the scene of an execution. Tie a guy to two different horses, and then they make the horses run, and they really split his body, and we were talking like if it was real. The fact is, most of it wasn't real, and we bought it like it was real. Mondo-documentary this year, pseudo-documentary. And they lead you into believing that it's real by music and editing and narration. One thing that is interesting about Leaving Neverland is the pictures and the building of character, which doesn't go so well with telling a story about rape. It goes well with telling a story about a person. What is important? What's the importance of telling how Wade Robson's father and mother met up in Australia in the 70s, or I don't know when? What's the importance of that? To the story of an actual rape he claims to have suffered. Nothing but you feel more close to him, you feel more attached to him, you feel more sympathetic to him. And then they start speaking of Moonwalker, but they show scenes of the way you make me feel, which is a video, I think it's very inappropriate, of Michael Jackson being really rude to a woman. And stalking a woman. I think it's very rude, inappropriate, and politically incorrect. I don't like that video. I like the music, I don't like the video. The editing is very much done on purpose to lead you into believing that there is this sad piano music in the background. And there are many other holes that you can dig here on the internet, like this train station that didn't exist. How come James Hitchcock's mother celebrated Michael Jackson's death in 2009 if she only knew about the alleged abuse back in 2013. So I think these are guys who wanted to be stars, didn't achieve the condition of stars. You were prodigy children and you became somewhat normal adults, and of course there was the need to divert the attention from Untouchable about that ogre Harvey Weinstein, also known as Jabba the Hutt. Yeah, the guy, if you didn't have sex with that monster, he would destroy your career. I don't know, I'd rather wait tables and clean toilets than have sex with that creature. He looks like Jabba. But the similarities of Leaving Neverland and Faces of Death are in editing, narration, and some creepy music. And they lead you into believing, I'm telling you, we believed Faces of Death was real. A few years ago, I told a friend, Faces of Death is not real. She was like, oh no, that wasn't real. Oh yes, another thing that is interesting, that if you say you don't believe in Leaving Neverland, they say you're a pedo supporter. Me, of all people. No, it's just that I know people lie, and I've seen people lying many times. One thing is when a 7-year-old tells you of an abuse. Another thing is when a 39 or a 40-year-old comes telling a story full of holes and changes the story all the time. I'll tell you one thing. I've worked on at least one case involving that sex violence against a child, 7-year-old. The 7-year-old never changed the story. Once we showed her support, she's never changed her story. The guy has been sentenced to jail, has spent 8 years there, and now he's free. When she is known he was free, she was terrified. Right now she's a tall woman, he won't go after her, he likes children. And he wasn't a weirdo guy like Michael Jackson. He was a very common man. Usually these guys are the most common people. Like a pedophile was getting arrested here in Brazil. He was a doctor and he looked like the most common man around. Like the guy next door. The monster is next door. But he doesn't look different. He doesn't look like a weirdo. So there are many similarities, and I tend to believe that we won't be hearing about Untouchable, and we'll still be hearing a lot about Leaving Neverland. I've already told you how it has a lot to do with Faces of Death, and I think it shouldn't be considered a documentary. I think it should be considered a pseudo-documentary or a shockumentary, because of the theme it deals with. In the case of Faces of Death, it deals with death. In this case, we deal with child sex abuse, and those are shockumentaries. Death doesn't shock as much, but an abuse against a child will always shock, unless if you're a pedophile, a psychopathic pedophile. But it will always shock audiences. So these are shockumentaries. Guys, I'm not a Michael Jackson fan. And I'll tell you one thing, I'm a music fan. And I watched almost everything in music. I've even watched Lords of Chaos, the movie on the Norwegian black metal scene. I grew up listening to heavy metal music. I'm a rock musician. I've just missed today a rehearsal. We were rehearsing Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath is my favorite band, but I'm so used to watching documentaries on musicians and reading bios on musicians that I'm living in everything that is on the press, because I know how often they lie about musicians. Now they're coming up with the story that Dave Bowie committed assisted suicide, unconfirmed by his wife and his son and his daughter. Another story they have come up is that Whitney Houston had a lesbian lover. And they're always telling stories, huh? Oh yes, and that Courtney Love had Kurt Cobain killed. That's conspiracy theory. Kurt was a depressive man who had a drug problem, and he killed himself. He wasn't the only one of the Seattle scene to kill himself. These things are nonsensical, and I shouldn't have to be explaining about them here. Believe survivors. People lie all the time. If somebody comes to you with a story of abuse, you gotta hear. Recently, back into 2016, a woman said she's being raped. The guy lost his job, lost his business, and his wife left him. She hadn't been raped. It was just a Facebook text, and everybody was sharing it. She hadn't been raped. I read the story and I thought, this is weird. She lied for likes. People lie all the time. So when a person comes to you with an abuse story, you gotta hear. But you can't be quick in saying this guy, where is due process of law? So if you believe in that guy, Dan Reed, well, might as well believe in Soaked and Bleach or Faces of Death. I'm sorry. You're naive and somebody's gonna take advantage of you.